bucka. Ha. You know the deal.
Next thing we're going to talk about in our number sense unit is called order of operations. And the first question you're probably going to ask yourself is, well, what is order of operations? Well, what order of operations is it's a rule that mathematicians follow so that mathematical operations are always done in the same order. And we're going to look at an example to explore this a little bit. So here's a very simple mathematical question where we just have two operations to do. So here we have addition and we have multiplication. So you might look at this and say, well, it makes sense to start with what's furthest to the left and just work our way to the right. Some people who approach this question might say, well, I'm going to start by adding 3 plus 2. Now, when you have these multi-step questions, the way I suggest you do them is you answer one part at a time and leave everything else exactly the same, working your way down. Just helps you sort of organize your thoughts and make sure that you haven't missed anything. So we added 3 plus 2, and we got 5. The rest of the question was times 4. We haven't dealt with that yet. So I wrote that out exactly the same. And you'll notice I'm working down instead of writing my answer to the right. Kind of helps us see what pieces of the question that we've done. So again, you might say, well, I'm going to start on the left and just work my way to the right. So now we have 5 times 4, which is 20. So that's one possible answer to this question. Now, another way to approach this is you might look at this question and say, well, I think multiplication is more important than addition. So your opinion might be that maybe the multiplication should be done first, even though it doesn't appear first. And if that was the case, well, we would answer 2 times 4 first, and then leave everything else exactly the same. Again, working our way down. And then we just have 3 plus 8, which is 11. So what you can see here is, depending on what we decide to do first, or what order we decide to do the operations in, we do end up with a different answer. And this is a problem for mathematicians because if you're doing calculations that involve sending a satellite out into space, you want to make sure that everybody's arriving at the same answer so that satellite gets out into space. As one example. So you want to make sure that everybody's doing these operations in the same order. And so that's why essentially the mathematicians had to come up with a rule to say, well, we're going to prioritize operations so that some operations are done before others. And this is where the phrase BEDMAS comes from. BEDMAS is an acronym. And what that means is it's a word where each letter represents a word. So what we're going to do is go through each one of these letters and just explain what each letter stands for, what each letter represents. And then we'll look at a couple of examples to understand how this helps us with order of operations. So starting with the B, the letter B in BEDMAS represents brackets. And brackets aren't actually an operation. It's just a way to prioritize what gets done first in a mathematical question. And again, we're going to explore this in a couple of examples. The next letter E represents exponents. Now, in grade 6, you don't learn about exponents until you get to grade 7. So these examples that I'm going to look at, none of them are going to involve exponents, but in questions that you will be doing in the future, exponents will be part of those questions, and so exponents are an operation that have to be included in order of operations, but they won't be in any of the examples that I'm doing today because this is an introductory video for grade 6s, and again in grade 6 you don't learn about exponents. You don't learn about exponents until grade 7. Now, the next two letters that we have here, the D and the M, I'm grouping those two letters together, and I'm doing that for a reason. First of all, the D and the M represent division and multiplication. And the reason that I've grouped those two letters together is because they have the same level of priority. And again, we're going to explore what that means a little bit in some examples. But essentially what that means is you do them in the order that they appear from left to right. So it may be possible that you do multiplication before you do division, even though in BEDMAS the M comes after the D. The division and multiplication have the same level of priority. So you do them in the order that they appear, or from left to right. And similarly, I'm going to group the last two letters together, the A and the S. Those represent addition and subtraction. But like division and multiplication, they have the same level of priority. So addition and subtraction are grouped together in that they have the same level of importance. So again, you may do subtraction before you do addition. It all depends on the order that they appear. And we are going to explore this with a few examples, so you'll see what I mean. But it's just essential to know that division and multiplication, they have the same level of importance, the same priority. Addition and subtraction have the same level of importance. They have the same priority. So next, let's look at some examples. And the first example that we're going to look at, well, we've already done this example, but as we saw, when we weren't sure which order we should do the operations in, we came up with two different answers. Well, now that we know what order we have to do these operations in, the first thing we're going to do is look at, well, what operations do we have here? And what we have is addition and multiplication. So if we look at BEDMAS, we have addition down here and multiplication here. So division and multiplication, again, those go together. Addition and subtraction, those go together. But since multiplication comes before addition in BEDMAS, that means that we have to do the multiplication first. So that means we're going to answer this question first and leave everything else exactly the same. So 2 times 4 is 8. And then I haven't dealt with the 3 or the plus yet. So we leave that exactly the same. And again, you'll notice I'm working my way down to answer these questions. Answering one part at a time, leaving everything else exactly the same. Well, now we only have one operation left, which is 3 plus 8, and 3 plus 8 is 11. So what we now know is that of the two answers that we got when we looked at two different ways to approach this question, we know the correct answer is 11 because we have to do the multiplication before we do the addition. So with this next example, as you can see, unlike that first example we looked at, this one has a lot more steps to it. So this is where it's particularly important to work your way down, only doing one step at a time. So the first thing we're going to do here is look at the operations that we have. And what we have is multiplication, we've got some subtraction, division, some more subtraction, and then some addition. But there's something else here that's a little bit different, and I've put this 8 minus 5 inside of brackets. And again, that's what the B represents in BEDMAS. And you'll notice it comes first in BEDMAS. And again, brackets typically don't represent an operation. They can represent an operation, and we're going to talk about that in our next example. But brackets typically just means you look at what's inside of the brackets and you have to do that first. That takes priority. So inside of the brackets, we have 8 minus 5. So we have to do that first. We have to answer that first. Once we've done everything inside of the brackets, typically we don't need the brackets anymore. So 8 minus 5 is 3. I've solved everything inside of the brackets, so the brackets are gone. But now again, I need to write everything else on this question that I haven't dealt with. So the 2, the times, we dealt with this 8 minus 5, and we got the answer of 3. So the rest of the question, we're going to leave exactly the same. So now we look at this and we ask ourselves, okay, well again, what operations do we have left? We have multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition. So we know that division and multiplication comes before addition and subtraction. But as discussed, they have the same level of priority. So when we have division and multiplication to do, we do them in the order that they appear. So what that means is here we have our multiplication, and here we have our division. Well, because multiplication comes first in the question, even though M comes after D in BEDMAS, these letters, D and M, are essentially interchangeable. They go back and forth because we do them in the order that they appear. So we're going to do the multiplication first. So 2 times 3 is 6, and then we've answered that part of the question. We're going to leave the rest of the question exactly the same. Rewrite everything that we see there that we haven't dealt with yet. So now what do we have left? Well, we have division, subtraction, and addition. And in BEDMAS, division and multiplication comes before addition and subtraction. So we're going to do the division question first. And it happens to be first in the question. But again, we're doing it first because it's the priority in BEDMAS. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. We're going to leave the rest of the question exactly the same. And now what do we have left? Well, we have subtraction and we have addition. So just like division and multiplication, addition and subtraction are interchangeable. These two letters could switch back and forth because they have the same level of priority, so we do them in the order that they appear. So here, even though in BEDMAS subtraction is at the end, because subtraction and addition have the same level of priority, we do them in the order that they appear, so we're going to do the subtraction first. 2 minus 2 is 0, and then we leave the rest of the question exactly the same, and 0 plus 7 is 7. So here's another example where we've got a few operations to deal with, and when you look at this question, your instinct is probably to, when you look at this, is you look at it and you say, well, I see brackets, so that means that we have to do brackets first. Well, if you recall, brackets, really, it's not an operation. Brackets means we have to do whatever is inside of the brackets first. And inside of these brackets, all we have is a number, just the number 5. So there's really nothing to do inside of the brackets. And inside of this bracket, we just have a 2. So there's nothing to do inside of the brackets here. So in terms of BEDMAS, in terms of order of operations, we don't really have brackets here as an operation. So you might ask yourself, well, what operation is this? And if you've watched the video on Introduction to Algebra, sometimes we don't use this symbol for multiplication because this symbol, x, is often used as a variable in algebra. So the operation that we have here in between these brackets is multiplication. So when we have bracket 5, bracket 2 written like this, it means 5 times 2. So the operations that we have here are subtraction, multiplication, and addition. Even though there are brackets written, those brackets in this case indicate multiplication. So we have to do the multiplication first, and 5 times 2 is 10. and then we're going to leave everything else exactly the same. So we have the 12 and the minus that we haven't dealt with, and we have the plus and the 3 that we haven't dealt with. Well, now all we have left is subtraction and addition. Addition and subtraction have the same level of priority in BEDMAS, so we do them in the order that they appear from left to right. So we're going to do the subtraction here first because it appears first. 12 minus 10 is 2. And then we write the rest of the question that we haven't dealt with, and then 2 plus 3 is 5. So with this next example, again, we're going to take a look at the operations that we have here, and using BEDMAS, prioritize which part of this question we should do first. And here, you'll notice we do have our brackets, and when we look inside of the brackets, there is stuff to do inside of the brackets here. So the B in BEDMAS represents brackets, and that means that we have to do what's inside of the brackets first. And inside of the brackets, we've got a couple of operations. We have subtraction, and we have multiplication. Now, inside of the brackets, we have to follow BEDMAS. So according to BEDMAS, we have to do the multiplication before we do the subtraction. So inside of the brackets, we're going to follow BEDMAS. So we're going to do 1 times 4. Now, we haven't done everything inside of the brackets yet, so the brackets can't disappear. 1 times 4 is 4, but we have to leave the 5 and the minus because we haven't dealt with that yet. And we also haven't done everything inside of the brackets yet. So the brackets are still there. The rest of the question stays the same. So now looking at this step of our problem here, again, we still have brackets because we haven't solved everything inside of the brackets yet. And inside of the brackets, we only have one thing left to do, which is 5 minus 4. 5 minus 4 is 1, and now that we've done everything inside of the brackets, and the brackets don't represent multiplication here, we're not using these brackets to multiply, those brackets can disappear. The rest of the question stays exactly the same. Well, now that we've dealt with everything inside of the brackets, we have to continue working our way through BEDMAS. What we have left here is multiplication and division. Well, if you recall, division and multiplication have the same level of priority, so we do those in the order that they appear. We have addition as well, but addition we're going to do after the multiplication and the division. So since multiplication and division have the same level of priority, we're going to do 1 times 8 first. The addition we haven't done, so that 7 and the plus has to stay the same. 1 times 8 is 8. And then we still have the divided by 2. Now all we have left is addition and division. Division comes before addition in BEDMAS, so we're going to answer the division part of the question here first. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then we just have our one last thing to do here, which is our addition, and 7 plus 4 is 11. So here you can see with so many steps why it's important to work your way down, doing one step at a time, answering that part of the question, and leaving everything else exactly the same. This is helpful for a couple of reasons. It helps you make sure that you don't miss anything or that you're not doing things in the wrong order. If you tried to do all of this in your head, very good chance you're going to make a mistake and end up with the wrong answer. If you're writing a question like this on a quiz or a test, typically, even if you do end up with the incorrect answer, which we didn't here, but if you did, if you followed the correct steps and showed all of your work, and even if you made a small calculation error somewhere along the way, you're probably still going to get most of the marks. So it's in your best interest to show these steps in this way. So to finish off our lesson on order of operations, or BEDMAS, I'm going to ask you to answer a few questions here. Now, I've done the unusual step here of actually giving you the final answers. And the reason I'm giving you the final answers is because all of these questions involve at least a couple of steps. So you're going to go through all of those steps and see what your final answer is. And if you got a different number than the answers that I have here, you're going to want to take a look and go back and see if maybe you've done the operations in the wrong order, or if you miscalculated somewhere along the way. So with each one of these questions, the first thing you're going to ask yourself is, well, what operations do we have? And then which ones do we have to start with? You're going to work your way down, so leave yourself enough room underneath the question to answer the question. Okay. Now, with this very last question that we have here, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, these squared off things here are brackets. Okay. And then inside of those brackets, you also have brackets. And the last thing here is, in between these two brackets, there is no operation. So remember, that means you're multiplying there. Okay? So just a little tip. With that particular question, you have to start with what's inside of the first brackets first and follow order of operations there. And when you go through all of the steps following BEDMAS, your final answer there should be 3. If you're able to answer those questions and get these answers, congratulations, you now have a firm understanding of BEDMAS, or order of operations.